Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Gabester here. This is the heroic raid guide for Paragons of the Klaxxi, the second to last boss in Siege of Orgrimmar. And as always, you can click on the annotations at the bottom if you'd like to check out a shorter guide, the quick version, or any role-specific guides. As usual, we'll start with raid composition. This is pretty basic. You'll need 2 tanks for sure because of the debuffs that some of the Klaxxi will place on the tanks, just like in normal difficulty. And you'll also want 2 healers. You can get away with 1 healer. There isn't a significant amount of healing on this fight, outside of a few particular phases we'll talk about. But the DPS requirement for this encounter is fairly lax, so it's more about survival and management of the pretty lengthy fight and phases. So there's really no reason not to use 2 healers when you're using, or first learning this fight at least. Now, just like on normal difficulty, the order that these bosses will activate is always the same every attempt, every week. So the only thing you can change is the order in which you kill them. So there are really not many different choices you can make in terms of the order. It's pretty set in stone. There are a few minor variances, which I'll discuss. But either in-game in my notepad add-on on the left, you can see it, or in the top left, I've made it larger text. That's the basic kill order that we're using here. And I'm pretty confident it's the best kill order in terms of safety and capabilities and simplicity and all that good stuff. So I'll just go through them briefly and talk about why they're in those positions. The first few are basically to get through the most difficult mobs quickly. So Skeer, and actually I've listed the names kind of, last name first almost. So that when I am doing this, raid leading position, I can call out the last name, which is easier to say and identify for players than the first names, which are confusing. So you say Bloodseeker, you're talking about Skeer the Bloodseeker. Anyway, so Bloodseeker's first because if you don't kill him quickly, the bloods that he keeps spawning will potentially heal, and this is just extra DPS that you would have to either contribute to the bloods to take them down or to deal to the boss after it gets healed. So Skeer is always first. Rikkal the Dissector is second because he will use a debuff that's very difficult to deal with if you don't handle it properly on the tank, spawning a bunch of extra adds. So you want to kill him second. Korven is third so that he doesn't continuously shield people and then heal them up. You can get rid of the shield with a special ability from one of the mobs, but it's not worth dealing with that. You can just burn him down. We'll talk about that in a moment. Hisek, the Swarmkeeper, is next, primarily because you want to get rid of the aim ability that he keeps using, and the bolts are rather annoying to dodge since he's stationary in the middle there. Xaril, the Poison Mind, is next. He's probably the one that you have to burn down pretty quickly, one of the few that really needs high DPS because he'll use targeted effects that generally cover the ground and whatnot. Again, we'll talk about those in a second. So you want to kill him quickly once he's active. Kaz'tik Manipulator is also a pretty quick DPS target because he will activate the little bugs around the outside and they will murder people if you don't handle them properly. Kil'ruk the Wind-Reaver is the next one. Basically, you kill him as soon as he's activated because as he's alive longer, his damage increases, which is the same for all the mobs, but for him in particular, he can do a lot of damage to your tanks. So he's the most dangerous mob to tank pretty much, even above Korven in my opinion. So he's pretty much first when he's active, which is number 7 total. Then Iyyokok is pretty basic. He just does, fire chain stuff, which is not that difficult to deal with as long as your raid is aware of their positioning. And then finally Xaril's the Locust, last on the list. Not really very scary. Everything he does you can dodge, so you don't really have to worry about him getting high stacks. So that's the basic explanation of the order. The only thing you might consider changing is swapping Wind-Reaver number 7 down to number 9. And then that would push number 8 and number 9 on the current list up to number 7 and number 8. But that's how we originally did it, and it works fine. But we found that Kil'ruk, the Wind-Reaver, is more dangerous than the other two, so we pushed him up further in the list. But other than that, I think this is pretty much a set-in-stone method, and I wouldn't suggest changing it too much. So I think the easiest way to do the guide for this fight, since it's so complicated, is just to walk through each boss and talk about, while you're killing that boss, what various raid members should be doing. So in the top left there is the basic notes for the first boss that you're killing, which is Bloodseeker. And the active bugs, of course, are the first three: Bloodseeker, Dissector, and Swarmkeeper. Both Bloodseeker and Dissector need to be tanked. And the first note that's important on Heroic is that the Dissector tank, which is our monk tank in this case, needs to wait for the first injection debuff to be used on him or herself before using avoidance or mitigation abilities to prevent further injections. This is really key because allowing the first injection will mean that the first set of amber parasites that you see around the screen there will spawn. And dealing with these is probably one of the trickiest parts when you're first learning the fight, but luckily it's right away. Basically, you'll get all these amber parasites that will spawn kind of around where, it's hard to describe where they spawn. Basically randomly around the room, but more towards the tank. And when they appear, you can CC them or stun them or any of that good stuff. So you should try to CC them. Everyone in the raid should have some form of CC, or close to everyone. You can even root them if you need to. Otherwise, they'll just attack and beat on people. And this is extra damage you don't really want to deal with. Once they're active and CC'd, then you can just leave them CC'd for the remainder of their lifespan, while this person that gets charmed as a scorpion needs to go off and eat at least one parasite during their scorpion duration. You have time to eat up to 2 parasites if you're quick about it, but if you do not eat one of the parasites while you're a scorpion, you will die when the scorpion fades. So that's the first key mechanic, is making sure your tank allows that first injection to go off so that you get the first set of parasites fast enough for that first scorpion target to eat one. If you delay at all, use your mitigation ability too quickly, the parasites won't be out active quickly enough. And once the parasites are out for the first time, you do not want any other parasites. You can technically survive if you get another set, but it's terrible. It's really up to your Dissector tank to not allow the second set or beyond. Okay. Meanwhile, the Bloodseeker tank should be pulling Bloodseeker back toward the entrance of the room. And this is because of the overall strategy for killing the Bloodseeker, which is basically to avoid dealing with the bloods that he spawns. If you have enough DPS, you kill him before the bloods reach him, and then you don't have to worry about that mechanic, basically. Now, to do that, you need to start off by attacking Dissector first for about 5% of his health or so. So once he reaches 95 or so, then call for a swap, and everyone swaps to Bloodseeker. The reason for this is that the bloods, when they spawn, will target the bug boss that has the lowest health at the time. So by attacking Dissector first, briefly, when the bloods first spawn, they will target Dissector. So you can see them all going to the Dissector in the top left of the screen there. And it doesn't matter if they heal those bosses, right? You just don't want them to come for Skeer. Note that the bloods have a radius on their heal explosion. It can hit multiple targets. So that's another reason that your Skeer tank needs to pull the boss back quickly. He does tend to leash the tank a bit, so make sure that the tank is backpedaling slowly but methodically. The second set of bloods that you see coming in there, if you don't have enough DPS, you probably will have to stun the front 2 at least, nearest to the door. And that way they will be delayed another few seconds, giving you enough time to finish off the Bloodseeker. You can technically use Bloodlust if you desperately need the DPS, but I do not recommend it because you'll probably want it for later parts of the fight. So your raid should be, with 2 healers and 2 tanks, should have enough DPS to push Bloodseeker dead before the second set of bloods reaches him. So, other than that, you're just avoiding the basic mechanics, the rapid-fire bolts from Swarmkeeper, who's in the center, so that's another reason you're pulling to the entrance, because he's stationary, so the gap between the bolt shots will be wider way out here, and allows you to avoid stuff. And then you need people to soak up the aim. So generally for dealing with aim, and this first explanation for this first boss is actually going to be longer than the rest because I'm dealing with 3 boss mechanics that, normally there will be 1 extra set. But anyway, to help with aim, we have an aim team of 3 players. And we decided to use our 2 healers and then another ranged DPS just to maximize DPS on the bosses so that, similar to the next boss, Garrosh Hellscream, you want players that aren't doing much DPS to be the ones that have to move around a lot. So adding the 2 healers as part of that team will help out your overall damage. Anyway, so we have our 2 healers and a ranged DPS that has access to a personal cooldown that's very frequent as part of the aim team. So here you can see we step into the aim, and the basic idea is that with 3 players, in addition to the person targeted by aim, so 4 in total, you do not need a personal cooldown to survive it. Anybody can survive if it's spread 4 ways. You just have to be full health. However, if one of the 3 aim team members, so one of our 2 healers or the other ranged DPS, is the target of the aim, then we announce in our voice chat to use a cooldown. So all 3 of us will use a personal cooldown because it will only be split 3 ways, and so the damage will be amplified. And so we found it's best to use a cooldown for that. So that's the basic process for aim. Other than that, we each have rough positions within the line because you don't want to overlap, otherwise you take area damage. So with roll as a monk, I'm the one furthest away from the raids, so closest to the center of the boss, because I can get there fastest. And then we have our next healer kind of in the middle, and then the third person, the DPS player, closest to the targeted aim player. And this just means that we can always have rough positions within the line of the beam without overlapping one another. And so once you've killed Bloodseeker, your DPS target is now Dissector. And the first thing you'll notice is that Dissector should be tanked off to one side of the entrance or the other. The reason for this is that the bloods that were spawned second that should still be active after Bloodseeker dies will continue to come into the Bloodseeker's previous position, which should be the center near the entrance. To avoid the bloods healing Dissector, you keep him tanked off to one side because the bloods have an area effect explosion, basically. So just make sure the tank pulls him off to the side. Other than that, the tank needs to continue using mitigation abilities. You do not need to spawn additional parasites, and it would hurt you quite a bit if you did. Meanwhile, the Locust tank, who's the new activated bug, should be the tank that was on Bloodseeker previously. Pretty simple. And the raid itself should continue to CC parasites, soak up the aim with the aim team, avoid the rapid fire bolts, and you also want to avoid the new Hurl Amber and Whirl abilities, which are used by Locust. To help with avoiding Hurl Amber in particular, you'll want to take note of when the boss has charged off, when Locust is charged off somewhere and then leaps up into the air. This will indicate that Hurl Amber is coming. The best thing we found is to have our ranged DPS kind of stay to one side of the room or the other. And those are the players that are targeted by the Hurl Amber. That way, this keeps the center of the room, particularly where melee are going to be during this part of the fight, free of the Hurl Amber pools. Also, Hurl Amber is completely avoidable. You will notice that on the ground there's a bit of a ground effect. Here you can see it's casting now. So there's kind of an explosion on the ground that will indicate where it's going to land before it actually appears. So the best thing you can do is to watch around your feet closely, and when Hurl Amber is activating, just keep moving in one direction. As long as you don't cross over the position of another player that is potentially a target, you should be fine. So that's pretty much it for dealing with Dissector here. Just focus on all the basic things you were before, as well as avoiding the Hurl and Whirl from him, and kill him down. The third target is Korven the Prime, so as soon as he activates, you'll focus on him. The basic idea here is that because Korven will use his Amber heal on the first bug to reach 50% health while he's alive, and this prevents damage unless you break it with one of these special bug abilities, it's not worth dealing with that mechanic. So you kind of get around that by basically forcing him to heal the other target that's active, which is Karaz the Locust. And while he's healing Karaz, you have 30 seconds with which to burn Korven before he can recast his heal. So you finish Korven off during that period. So the way you do this is to push Korven the Prime to about 60% health and then stop. And then push Locust to 50%. When Locust reaches 50, he will receive the heal from Korven. And then while that guy's healing, you don't have to worry about him. You can push Korven down within that 30-second period. It's worth noting that there are a few tricks. There you can see the amber heal going off the shell. And a few timings to be aware of. The main one is that Locust will often run away while he's doing, his hurl amber or something like that, just as he's about to be pushed 50%. So it's really crucial that your raid holds their DPS when Prime is low so they don't push him first. Even if if Locust is below 50%, he can still go up into the hurl animation. However, if he is below 50%, once he comes down from the hurl, he will immediately become healed and just stay stationary where he landed, basically. So that's the basic idea in terms of DPS and overall strategy for killing Korven. Meanwhile, once Korven activates, after you've killed Dissector, as long as there isn't a fresh scorpion that hasn't eaten a parasite, you should finish off the parasites that are still active, because otherwise they'll just annoy you for the rest of the fight. They obviously target someone, so make sure that player comes close to the raid so that melee DPS or whatever can help, because the parasites do like to heal themselves if you don't kill them quickly enough. And then all the basic stuff still applies here. You're avoiding all the bolts and hurl and whirl. Make sure you soak aim still, and do not stand in front of Korven the Prime. He will do a cleave attack with a vicious assault, so your melee in particular need to be aware of this. To deal with vicious assault, it's quite a bit of damage on your tanks. So the best thing is to have your tanks swap the Korven target midway through the assault. So basically, the assault is around 6 strikes or so, I think, over about 6 seconds, 5 or 6 seconds. So basically just have a tank swap occur halfway through that. And this will prevent the stacks from getting too high for any particular player, and you should be able to manage the damage from that. And your tanks can, of course, feel free to use cooldowns, although this will occur a number of times, so you can't do it for every single one. The fourth target is Hisek the Swarmkeeper. And of course, he's stationary in the center, so after you're done killing the bugs at the front, dealing with Korven, you can move the raid into the middle. Be aware that he could be using his bolts as rapid fire as you're moving in, so just stay far away during that so you can avoid these shots. If you get hit by one of these and some other form of miscellaneous damage, you will die, so it's really important you avoid that. Otherwise, the new active bug is Lucid, Iyyokok, and he's pretty simple. Everything's still pretty much the same while you're killing Swarmkeeper that you've been doing, so from here on, I'm not even going to include the notes about avoiding Hurl Amber and Whirl from Lucid, from Locust rather, sorry, because he'll be active the rest of the fight, so just, you always want to do that, pretty basic stuff. So anyway, continue to soak aim for the last bit of Swarmkeeper's life, avoid the bolts, and then the new ability is Fiery Edge from Iyyokok. This one is going to be active for most of the fight as well, so it's important your raid gets used to handling it. Best thing to do is simply be spread out. Your melee will, of course, continue to attack, so if you're really heavy on melee and you get unfortunate targeting, they may need some personal cooldowns to help mitigate the damage. But generally with ranged and healers, they should be spread at least 15 yards apart from an attached player. So if you have a fire beam that attaches you to someone near you, don't be afraid to move away from that player a little bit extra. You don't want to get out of heal range, but otherwise it will help mitigate the damage significantly if you're 15 plus yards away. So there you can see, that's a pretty good spread. Even though there are two melee pretty close to one another, you can deal with the damage just healing through that pretty easily. And healers, you don't need to be afraid to use heal cooldowns for Fiery Edge. Again, combinations of abilities are what kill people in this fight. So if they get a diminish cast from Iyyokok, which is just random damage, at the same time of heavy ticks, they could be in trouble. But otherwise, just burn Swarmkeeper down, pretty basic, and avoid all his stuff until he's dead. So next up, you're dealing with Xaril the Poisoned Mind, who is the newly activated bug. And this is probably one of the more dangerous phases when you're learning the fight, other than the very beginning with all the parasites and whatnot. The reason for this is the catalyst. So on Heroic, he seems to have 3 different catalytic reactions that he can use. And these will not activate for a while after you're into the phase, but they seem to be random in the order. When you're first learning this fight, you can expect that based on your DPS, you'll probably go through 2 different catalytic reaction colors. So I've listed all 3 in the top left: orange, purple, and green. Unfortunately, I only have brief footage of green in this fight. This footage was taken well after our first kill, unfortunately. So what that means is that our DPS is much higher here than it would be when we were first learning the fight. But I can briefly explain them. The general rule, though, is regardless of what you get, you want to spread far apart from one another. Even melee should run away from the bosses temporarily. And basically just avoid stuff on the ground. So orange creates these rings of little orange energy that will emanate from the targeted players and expand up to about 30-yard radius or so. You can touch the edge of your own ring, but you cannot touch other people's. So this is why spreading out is important, and just make sure you're far enough away from other rings until they dissipate. Orange is the easiest to deal with. Purple, you will, if you have the debuff for purple, you will basically auto-run for about 5 or 6 seconds, and while you're running, you will leave a path of purple fire behind you. So again, the best thing is when this is being cast to run away from the boss toward the edges of the room, and then because you're auto-running, face away from the bosses, so face to the outer wall. And then you can just run around the outside edge where it doesn't really matter whether there's fire or not. And then once it's over, come back in and keep going. And then finally green, what you see at the very end of the clip here, just before the boss dies temporarily, it will create little pools of green goo under the players that are targeted. And these actually stay around for a long time. For most of the remainder of the fight, these will be active. You can dissipate them by touching them, but we didn't really find it was worth actively doing that. But if you have someone with cooldowns or something, that may be worth looking into. But otherwise, they'll just stay active and they move around slowly. So the problem is if you're pretty heavy on melee, DPS and stuff, you can get quite a few of these green pools in the middle if you're not careful. And then you have to work actively to avoid them for the rest of the fight, which is sort of annoying. But that's pretty much it. Everything else is from the previous 2 guys is still going on, of course. So deal with fiery edge by staying spread again. And that's general rule for this fight, is to stay spread if you're ranged or healer, to lessen the lethality of all these abilities. So next up, you have Kaz'tik the Manipulator. And he's another one of the bosses that you'll want to burn down as soon as he appears. Now, the important thing to note about this boss is that, of course, he has the little kuchongs that spawn around the room. And as adorable as they are, they're very dangerous. So the first thing to be aware of is that all your raid members need to watch closely for any kuchong spawns near them. And you may have seen on the screen there in the back right, one spawn near one of our shaman, and it just ate him right away. So that's the most important thing about this phase, is that players need to stay away from the kuchongs. If you touch one in the front, basically, they will kill you. And they'll become enraged, basically, and pissed off. Beyond that, they kind of spawn in random locations. There'll be 3 active at any time. So once all 3 are active, if possible, your healers and your ranged DPS should move in a position far away from them, wherever that opening gap happens to be. We use a series of 3 raid markers around the sort of center circle, so we can quickly communicate, oh, it looks like it's kind of safe at green or purple or wherever, so people can move over there. But that's the basic idea, stay far away from the bugs. Once all 3 are active, you can kind of see where they're at. And the reason for this is that throughout this phase, one of the Kuchong will mesmerize someone, just like a normal. And this will pull that player toward them. And while they're being pulled, if they get in melee range, of course, they get eaten. But the Kuchong will also gain energy. So when a mesmerize occurs, your ranged DPS in particular need to burn that Kuchong quickly. And the faster you burn it, the faster the person will break out. To help with this, if the player is going to touch the Kuchong, the tank that was on Korven the Prime, way back when you were killing him, after he died, that tank should have picked up the Korven's buff, the special ability for clicking on the corpse. And this player can use that Master of Amber special ability on the mesmerized targeted player. This will freeze them for 5 seconds and then allow them to stay stationary long enough for the DPS to push the Kuchong so that the player doesn't get eaten. So that's a minor thing that will help quite a bit. Generally, when you're learning, we found that because of our DPS, unless you have a lot of heavy range DPS, you'll probably have 2 mesmerize occurrences during this phase. And they'll both be from the same Kuchong. So there's a good chance that that Kuchong will become a mature version and move around and try to kill people. Now, I believe that the mature Kuchong is not tauntable. However, it does have a threat table. So our tanks were able, after some practice, to watch when a Kuchong was going to become mature and immediately throw some threat moves on it and get it on them. Once it's on the tank, your DPS should burn it down. Just make sure you stay behind it and then kill it off quickly. So even if you get one mature Kuchong, it's fine. You can completely deal with it. Just as long as everyone else is far away from it and your tanks pick it up quickly, then you kill it off before it's a real threat. It should be okay. So that's basically this phase. This is the phase that we chose to use Bloodlust, below our big cooldowns, because we don't want, if we can avoid it, we don't want a mature Kuchong to deal with. But again, sometimes that'll just happen inevitably. So we use Bloodlust to try to burn down Kaz'tik, the Manipulator, as quick as possible. And everything else, still avoiding all the stuff from Iyyokok and Locust. But again, I saw no point in mentioning that in these sections every time. So there you go. Next boss. So the 7th boss is Kil'ruk the Wind-Reaver, who's the last bug to activate in the fight. And again, he should be killed as soon as he activates, in my opinion. I talked about in the kill order section a little bit of the reason for that, but aside from lowering the damage on the tank, which is very important, of course, the other main benefit to killing Kil'ruk, the Wind-Reaver, right away is that it actually helps your overall raid DPS quite a bit. Because Wind-Reaver uses Reave throughout the phase that he's active, and this will suck everyone toward him, and this dramatically lowers the DPS that you have on all targets, whether it's on him or someone else, because you're being pulled constantly, so even melee can't really target him or the other boss during that period. Ranged, of course, can't stay stationary, so they have to keep running and all that good stuff. So the faster you eliminate that Reave suck-in capability from the fight, the more DPS you'll have for the remainder of the encounter. So, the Wind-Reaver tank should not be the tank that was previously tanking Xaril the Poison Mind. This is just like normal. They counter one another in their debuffs, so make sure those tanks are worked out ahead of time. And because Wind-Reaver does potentially more damage than any other boss in the fight, even Korven, you really want to use heavy cooldowns. This is particularly important if you don't have any of your active mitigation going as a tank, whatever that skill may be. During a particular period, then you want to use an activated cooldown instead, because he will double strike you, he dual wields, and these hits can be significantly powerful. Other than that, the main mechanics are for your raid members to move rapidly in just one direction, doesn't matter where, when Death from Above is being cast. Because if he targets you with Death from Above and you stay in it, it'll probably kill you. But you can avoid it if you just simply are moving, so that when he leaps above you and then goes straight down to land on you, you're actually out of position where he landed. So you can see the red circle there in the back left where it's using it. And then the other thing is, of course, to avoid Reave damage. The further away you are from the boss while he's casting Reave, the less damage you'll take. And of course, if you get in melee range, it'll probably kill you. It's very significant. So the best thing is just to stay far away from him when he Reaves, and then just pull away since it has a suck-in mechanic. Also, you'll still get the fiery edge beams during this phase since you have Iyyokok still active. So don't be afraid to use a personal cooldown if you have a combination of fiery edge plus Reave damage, because that's quite a bit of damage that your healers have to deal with. But that's pretty much it. It's mostly up to raid members to avoid those basic mechanics and the tank to use cooldowns long enough for the raid to kill Wind-Reaver. Second to last target is Iyyokok the Lucid, who's been active for quite some time, so there's really no details to discuss here in terms of handling it. You've been doing everything up to this point that you're going to deal with here anyway. So just kill him off next. And the stat count from being active this long is quite high at this point. So damage from things like Fiery Edge and the Whirl from Locust and Amber and all that stuff will be about at the maximum that it's going to be in the fight. But it's still perfectly manageable as long as you deal with the basic mechanics of spreading out and all that stuff. So I really have nothing useful to add to this part. This is basically the cleanup. If you've reached this point after you kill Wind-Reaver, it's really difficult to screw up the fight. And then lastly, of course, once Iyyokok is dead, you have Karos the Locust as your final boss. And he's basically been hanging out with you. You're becoming roommates or whatnot. He's been here most of the fight at this point. So his stat count's really high, but again, both of his main abilities, Hurl and the Whirl, are completely avoidable. If you do get hit by Whirl, you can use stun breaks to get out of it, or movement breaks, I forget which. But generally your healer should be able to keep you active, as long as it's only one person that has it at one time. That said, it's very dangerous, so you do want to avoid it, of course, throughout all the fight, but his abilities are pretty basic, so that's kind of why you keep him this long to kill. Other things are much higher priority. And yeah, you're just cleaning up really at this point. Hopefully you're not right up against the Berserk timer. There have been a few of our early attempts and kills where we were right up against the Berserk timer, especially if someone dies, which you see someone is dead here. But, hopefully you can take him down. So that is it. That is the sectioned guide for heroic Paragons of the Klaxxi, and there really isn't much more to add at this point. If you want a full walkthrough, stay tuned in the next couple of minutes, and I'll just do a full walkthrough of the fight, talk about everything that's happening in order. But otherwise, as always, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If so, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time. So as you begin the fight, make sure everyone has Rikkal, the Dissector, targeted. As mentioned at the start, you want to burn him a little bit at the beginning to force the Bloods from Skeer to target Rikkal. So we generally just have one person, the raid leader, call out when you're switching off Rikkal. So I usually call it when he's about 95% or so. And including, swap time and extra dot damage and all that, he will be lower than Skeer as long as you swap at the right time. So meanwhile, Skeer is being pulled back by our Paladin tank, while the Rikkal tank pulled Rikkal off to the side where that purple marker is on the right. And this forces the Bloods to go toward that side position, so that even though Skeer sometimes takes a while to get out of the middle position, the Bloods, when they explode, will not hit Skeer, even if he's still kind of in the middle when they go off. So we burned Skeer down before the second Bloods got into range of him. But if he was still alive, we would stun both Bloods. We have assigned stun targets for the left and the right accordingly. We've also been CCing the parasites, and we have scorpions eating the parasites. Depending on your DPS, when you're starting out, you may just want people to only eat one scorpion while they're one parasite while they're a scorpion. But with our current DPS, we're able to have people eat two pretty comfortably. So here you can see I'm kind of in the center. I was dealing with aim, and I've got a parasite chasing me. Sometimes you won't have enough CC to deal with all the parasites, so you're just going to have to heal through the damage. It's not significant, you just have to be aware of when someone is getting feed damage from a parasite, and they're also getting hit by something else like the aim shot or something like that. So make sure your healers are aware of that. And as a raid leader, I tend to call out basic events in the fight, so things like bolt or hurl amber or aim if needed. And so here I'm soaking another aim around the time that Rikkal died. Korven comes down, and so our paladin's picking up Korven there and pulling him back to the center entrance position. And again, we're staying in this position until we're on Swarmkeeper, because since he's in the middle, this allows us to have more space to avoid the bolts, basically. And once Rikkal is dead, you want to clean up any parasites. We had one parasite remaining, so I pulled it into melee range since it was on me, and called for DPS to kill it. And now we're focusing Locust until he's low enough that we can switch to Korven. And we're kind of cleaving. You're completely fine to cleave both of them since they should be stacked on one another. Our tanks are swapping when Korven does the Vicious Assault about halfway through. And so here we have Korven low enough, we want to stop on him. We're waiting for Karaz to come back down from his hurl animation. And then he should transition. He should be about 50% there. Yeah, so there's the 50%, and he starts healing from Korven. And now we push Korven down and kill him off before the next Amber heal can go off. And you don't need a significant amount of DPS to do this as long as Korven is around 60 or 55%. And here I'm rolling to another aim. As I mentioned, as a monk, I can move generally faster on demand than the other players that are in the aim, so I'm positioned closest to the boss to soak that up. And since it was targeted on one of our 3 aim members there, I used a personal cooldown for it. So we've killed Korven, so tank threat is much lower now. So we're all in the middle, dodging the bolts, and now we can kill Hisek. And he's not very difficult. We have Iyyokok active now. It's probably the most dangerous thing during the Swarmkeeper kill is when you have bolts plus the fiery edge. So the most important thing is that your players should be aware that the bolts from Swarmkeeper are much more dangerous than the fiery edge ticks. So basically, if bolts are active at the same time as fiery edge, stay in a position that will avoid the bolts, even if you have to move to increase fiery edge damage. And that will help you a lot. So we have another set of bolts. And nothing much to this phase, pretty simple. More fiery edge. I love it when it's not targeted on me and I can just stay right in the middle of everything and heal. It's very handy. Alright, so now we have Xaril active, so we target him next. Yeah, we don't want to Bloodlust here, but we do want to focus DPS pretty heavily. Try to avoid as many catalysts as possible. Although it's not always possible to avoid more than one of them. And just be aware of the timing of when he can cast one of the catalyst oranges, and or not oranges, but colors, and be in position for that. So all our ranged are kind of staying far away so that when he does it, we'll be ready for it. And here comes the calculate. So here should be the color coming up soon. And I believe on this particular kill we got green. Yeah, there's the green. So moving far away as he's casting it so that if it targets you, you can position it somewhere away from the raid pretty much. And you can see the puddles moving around. They're rather annoying, but like I said, if you soak one a bit, it will dissipate eventually. But we don't really try for that actively. And now we're on our next target. So killing Kaz'tik as soon as he comes down. We got the bugs activated, and there was one in the back right that I mentioned before. Spawned near our shaman and ate him right away. So it became mature, but our paladin tank was able to pick it up very quickly, and then we just kill it off. and nothing much going on. The new Kuchong is back after we killed the previous spawn, so we'll probably get a Mesmerize pretty soon here. But the boss actually, yeah, he dies just after Mesmerize starts, so we still have to break our other healer out of that. She's going toward it. And there we go. Range DPS broke that Kuchong. And now we're on our next target, which is Kil'ruk, the Wind-Reaver. And again, targeting him as soon as he comes out to help mitigate the damage. Looks like somebody got hit by the whirl and couldn't mitigate the damage from themselves or break out of it. And they died. And I got hit by whirl at the same time, so that didn't help our healing, unfortunately. But at this point, having one down is okay, really. There's not that much left to DPS. And so here's the Reeve. So if possible, you want to stay away from it and just pull against it. Here's a Reeve plus Fiery Edge, which is probably the most dangerous, as I mentioned, during this phase. So you can use your cooldowns for that particular combination. And most of your healing should be focused on the tank of Kil'ruk. Both your tanks will be taking quite a bit of damage at this point, though, because both the remaining two bosses have been active for a long time. So their stack count is pretty high. And there's an interesting shape Fiery Edge, but the important thing is that players connected are far away from one another. I was still pretty close to one of our ranged who was pretty close to another person, but it was okay. And now we're on second to last boss, which is Iyyokok in this case. And you could pick one or the other. It doesn't really matter which one you do first in this case. We just find Fiery Edge is more dangerous than Locust, since Fiery Edge is not avoidable, but Locust's abilities are. And there's the Hurl Amber. And again, you'll get 2 to 3, might always be 3, but it seems like sometimes it's 2. Either way, 2 to 3 hurls every time he uses it, so you can watch the ground for that effect. And as I mentioned before, just start moving away as soon as that happens. Even if it targets you, you'll get out of it easily. And then we're on the final guy, Karos Locust, just to clean up at this point. As long as you're not up against the Berserk, very simple. And you can see those green puddles are still active. We haven't soaked a few of them, so quite annoying. Like I said, I think that's the most annoying of the catalyst colors. Orange is by far the easiest, since it's a one-off thing and then it's gone. And purple's a bit annoying, but we don't have that to deal with. So, yeah, I think that's about it. There's no point in blabbing my way through the rest of it. That's the basic walkthrough. So, you can see once you just go through the fight back to back to back, each of the phases, it's actually pretty quick. It's not a very long fight, all things considered. Most of the fight really focuses on survival with a few short bursts of DPS where it matters. But if you can just drill everyone to get used to what you're doing in any given phase, then things should come together. So, thanks again for watching, and see you next time.